The boy dragged his sack of firewood to the market every day, scorned by the entire town, until the day he collapsed from exhaustion. Everyone turned their backs. Everyone, except one soldier. And what he did left the whole town stunned into silence. "You dragging that damn sack of wood through here again?" Mrs. Mullins's voice screeched from the butcher shop in the center of the market, echoing through the bitter cold morning. Jace didn't answer. He just gripped the rope tighter in his hand, head down, pulling the long sack of firewood across the dirt road. His tattered shoes slid slightly on the slope, his heels leaving faint, cracked marks in the frozen ground. Glenmore was a small, quiet town, but it had never been peaceful for that 12-year-old boy. The fire from years ago, the one that turned Jace's parents into nothing more than names erased from memory, still haunted the main street. The bricks along that road remained dark with soot, as if the town itself insisted on preserving the stain as a punishment not only for the dead, but for anyone left behind. The sack dragged with a rough rustle behind him. One side was torn, exposing a chunk of wood that scraped the ground with a dry, hollow thud. It weighed nearly as much as Jace did, maybe more, but he didn't stop. Left hand on the rope, right hand out to balance. He had to sell this firewood. He needed to trade it for cough medicine for Ellie, his little sister, the only family he had left, lying sick in their wooden cabin at the edge of the forest. A freezing wind swept down the dirt slope. Not a single ray of sunlight pierced the thick, lead-grey clouds of winter. Shops began to open, but most who saw Jace quickly turned away. A man pulled his young son close and whispered, "Don't look at him. That family's nothing but trouble." As Jace neared the bend by the town square, the wooden wheel under his cart creaked sharply. A second later, the axle snapped. The sack tilted, then slammed to the ground, spilling logs in every direction. One piece rolled all the way to Mrs. Mullins's feet, brushing lightly against her leather boots. She looked down, her eyes narrowing. Then, without a word, the woman dipped a ladle into the wash basin, stepped outside, and flung the dirty water straight at the boy. The cold, filthy splash hit Jace square in the face, soaking the frayed collar of his worn-out shirt. The stench of raw meat mixed with mud clung to his skin, choking his throat. But Jace didn't flinch. He didn't stand up. He didn't fight back. He just sat there, his hands blindly gathering the scattered firewood from the filthy ground. The wind carried the sour smell and the sound of a few children giggling nearby. A jagged piece of wood splintered and scraped his hand. Blood seeped from the crack between his frostbitten fingers. He didn't press to stop the bleeding. He held the piece close to his chest, for warmth, not healing. Just then, a young woman across the street from the bakery noticed him and took a step forward, but stopped. Her eyes met Mrs. Mullins, who stood on the porch with her arms crossed, watching. The woman hesitated, then turned back inside and slid the glass door shut. An old truck rumbled past, its tires grinding over the muddy grooves. Jace looked up, just for a moment, then dropped his gaze again. The sack of firewood felt twice as heavy now, not just from the wood, but from the weight of the town stairs pressing down on his back. It took him nearly 15 minutes to gather the firewood back into the sack. He slid a broken stick under the cart to keep the axle from slipping again, then tied it down with a strip of cloth. Each movement was slow and sure, not because he was skilled, but because he had done this every day for the last 3 years. "Just a little longer. Wait for me, little sis," Jace whispered. No one heard. No one came. On the porch, Mrs. Mullins had already turned her back. Across the street, the bakery door remained shut. A gust of wind hissed past the roof, shaking loose a pile of snow that crashed down beside him. Someone had seen, but quickly looked away. Against the pale, frozen street, the only thing left was the small silhouette of a 12-year-old boy, dragging a sack no one wanted to see, up a hill no one wanted to climb. And Jace had no idea that this silent journey, hauling firewood to survive, would one day be the very thing that pulled an entire town out of the dark. Jace dragged the sack of firewood deeper into the central market as the townspeople began opening their stalls. He stopped quietly in front of Lucille's oven. Mrs. Lucille stepped out from behind the counter, her glare just as sharp as always, and spoke loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I told you already, I don't buy anything from the devil's family." Then she pointed to the pavement. "Go somewhere else. I don't want your shadow anywhere near my store." Jace lowered his head without a word. He set down the sack of firewood as he always did. But just then, 3 boys around his age came up. The biggest one kicked the axle of Jace's pull cart hard enough to flip it over. The firewood crashed to the ground, logs scattering in all directions. One log struck a passerby's leg, but no one stopped to help. The second boy burst out laughing and said loudly, "Oops, sorry, little devil boy broke his cart." Meanwhile, the third boy bent down, pretended to help pick up a piece of wood, then hurled it back at Jace with a cold, mocking throw. Jace crouched down and began gathering the wood, one piece at a time. He didn't say a word. His lips were pressed tight until they bled. His hands, cracked and scratched from the cold, trembled as he tried to fix the broken axle with a strip of cloth. But the moment he stood up, dizziness hit him. His vision blurred, the world spun, and he collapsed, face down, on the damp ground, his body lying motionless right in the busiest walkway of the market. Everyone saw it, but no one came forward. Mrs. Lucille simply pulled her shop door shut and sighed, as if she had just dodged some sort of disaster. Passers-by stepped around Jace like he was a puddle of dirty water. No sympathy in their eyes, not a single word of concern. A little boy about 8, holding his mother's hand, looked over and whispered, "What's wrong with him, Mama?" The mother replied softly, "Don't look, just keep walking," then pulled her child along, gliding past him. The boy lay there, his cheek cold and smeared with dirt, lips pale, his hand still clutching the piece of firewood, marked with the grain of a bird's wing. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on the thin fabric of his coat. His pull cart had tipped to one side, the axle bent like a broken arm. At that very moment, a horn blared from the end of the marketplace. Tires screeched against the frozen ground. A military truck, dusted in grey, skidded into the main path, braking hard in the middle of the crowd, forcing people to step back on both sides. The door slammed open. A man in a heavy coat stepped down. He walked with purpose, fast and straight. His gaze swept across the crowd, and no one dared to stop him. He moved toward Jace, knelt down, checked for a pulse, and asked firmly, "This boy, what happened?" No one answered. A few eyes looked his way and then turned away. He repeated the question, louder now. "How long has he been lying here?" Still silence. The soldier slipped one arm under Jace's back and lifted him gently off the ground. Adjusting the boy's posture, he stood up straight and scanned each face around him. Behind the bakery window, Mrs. Lucille stood motionless. The group of 3 boys looked down at their feet. A man shoved his hands into his coat pockets and walked off, pretending he'd never been there. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. "No one called for help," the soldier said. Calm, not shouting, not angry, but every word landed like a nail hammered into the air. "You saw a child collapse, and just watched him lie there?" A few people stiffened. An elderly woman muttered something under her breath, but no one replied. He turned, carrying Jace toward the truck. He opened the back door and laid the boy down with the care reserved for something fragile. Wrapping Jace in a military blanket, he reached down to fasten the seatbelt. That's when he saw it, a small crescent-shaped scar on Jace's neck, faint but unmistakable, and in that brief second the soldier froze, as if someone had grabbed him by the throat. A memory burst open in his mind like fire in the dark, the image of his daughter, who had died in a house fire years ago. He shut the door, climbed into the driver's seat, said nothing to anyone, never looked back. He left only one sentence behind. "If this is how you treat a child, then this town isn't worthy of being called a community." The engine roared. The military truck pulled away from the rundown market, leaving behind a snowy, stained courtyard and a collection of stunned eyes. The crowd stood still. Some bowed their heads, others turned away. No one spoke. As if their silence had just been exposed, but what they didn't know was this. that moment would be the last time they could pretend not to see. Because from that point on, no one in Glenmore could ignore the boy who pulled the sack of firewood. Because what was coming next would force every eye to turn and face the truth. The military truck came to a stop on the dirt slope leading up to the old field hospital, nestled against the pine-covered hillside. The two-story building, made of grey stone, had once received wounded soldiers during the Civil War. Now, only one room remained in use. The rest lay cloaked in dust and moss. Carter carried Jace through the dim corridor. The lighting was faint, the metal bed frames old but clean, tidied weakly out of a habit no one could quite remember the origin of. He laid the boy down gently, checked his breathing, loosened his collar, and pulled back the blanket. Jace was still unconscious, but his small hand clutched tightly at something wrapped in worn fabric. Carter carefully unwrapped it, a tattered piece of canvas cloth enclosing a small tarnished bronze badge. He brought it closer to the light, where faint engraving caught the dim glow. Holloway, Glenmore Fire Department. Carter froze. He knew that name, Holloway. That night, through the crackle of a failing radio, he'd heard the name shouted amid the chaos. Firefighter running into a burning warehouse to save his wife and child. Carter remembered the image clearly. A man cradling a little girl yelling, disappearing into the smoke. Then came the blast, and the name Holloway was buried with it. Carter's hand clenched, not because the boy had been abandoned in the market, but because of his eyes. That look. It was the same look his daughter had given him, right before the fire took everything. He sat on the edge of the bed, set the badge down on the table, and kept his eyes on the sleeping boy. In the midst of delirium, Jace whimpered, lips trembling. "Ellie, don't die, I'm back now, don't be scared." A chill ran down Carter's spine. He touched Jace's forehead, cold but no fever. Beneath the thick coat, the boy's body was all skin and bone. Carter opened his pack, took out a bag of IV fluid, inserted the line into the boy's arm, and secured it with gauze. When finished, he stepped back, straightened up, and stared at the ceiling in silence. An hour later, Jace stirred. His eyes landed on Carter, nervous, startled, then quickly looked away. He sat up abruptly, reaching for the IV, but Carter gently held his arm and spoke with a steady voice. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." "Let me go," Jace said, his voice hoarse. "I have to go back to Ellie." Carter asked, "Who's Ellie?" "I have to go. My little sister, she can't walk. She's home alone. I don't need to be here. Please don't save me." "Kid," Carter said softly, holding back his voice, "you collapsed in the middle of the market. Not a single person came to help you. I couldn't just let a child freeze to death in plain sight like that." For the first time, Jace looked him in the eyes. His gaze was bloodshot, silent, like stagnant water. "You don't understand," he said, each word falling like lead. "This whole town wants me gone." Carter didn't reply. In his mind, images from that old fire came rushing back like an unhealed wound. He remembered the screams, the smell of burning wood, the glow of flames dancing across the sign, Glenmore Council Storage. He remembered the shouting, "There's a child in there!" Then the explosion. And then, silence. Quietly he asked, "Your father, what was his name?" "Holloway," Jace answered without hesitation. "Michael Holloway." Carter lowered his head. That name. He stood, walked to the desk, picked up an old badge, held it in his hand for a long moment, then turned back, his voice low. "I saw your father. That night. During the fire." Jace flinched. He was trying to save someone. I heard his name over the radio. But by the time I got there, the warehouse had already exploded. People said he was the one who started it. Jace bit his lip and nodded, as if replaying a verdict he'd heard 100 times before. "I know what they say, but it's not true." Carter stared into those eyes far too old for a 12-year-old. He didn't say another word. He just sat back down beside the bed, poured a glass of water and handed it to Jace, who accepted it with trembling hands. "I know what they say," the boy repeated, quieter this time, but steady. There was no defiance in his voice, no begging, just a quiet truth no one had ever bothered to hear. Carter gave a small nod. "I'll take you home, but first I need to verify a few things." That sentence, simple, unpromising, was the first thing any adult had said to Jace in 3 years that didn't push him away. He didn't fully understand, but for the first time he felt like maybe he wasn't invisible. And in Carter's mind, a door to the past creaked open. The wind from that old fire came rushing in, smoke, guilt, and the terrible feeling that maybe he had once looked at the wrong man. The dirt road leading to the northern edge of Glenmore was riddled with potholes. Carter's truck bounced violently over each one, but he didn't slow down. In the passenger seat, Jace sat silently, both hands gripping the frayed straps of his backpack, eyes fixed on the window, saying nothing. He was fully awake now, but the silence between them had yet to break. "Are we close to your house?" Carter asked, eyes still on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "Past the hill. Then at the burnt-out power pole, turn left. Walk 100 more steps. And that's it." Carter nodded, saying no more. The wind whipped through the pine trees like the howling of ghosts from another time. As the truck rounded the final bend, a small wooden house came into view, its roof slanted severely to one side, walls stained with mildew, a cardboard patch taped over where glass should have been. Jace jumped out of the truck before Carter could even reach for the door handle. He ran straight to the porch and pushed open the creaking wooden door. "Ellie?" he called out, his voice tight, nearly cracking. A dry cough came from the shadows. "I'm here. I'm okay. You're back?" Carter walked slowly toward the doorway and stopped. From outside, he could see the inside clearly. Just one low bed, placed close to a battered fireplace. Brick walls split with deep cracks, dark stains from water damage running down like bruises. A little girl, maybe 7, lay on her side. Her hair was matted, her cheeks sunken, and her legs wrapped in 2 thin blankets. "Are you cold?" Jace sat down beside the bed, quickly pulling off his coat and laying it gently over her. "I'm not cold." "I've been waiting for you since yesterday," Ellie smiled faintly, then broke into a long, dry coughing fit. Carter remained under the porch eaves, eyes locked on the child. He didn't step inside. His foot halted at the threshold, as if one more step would crush something too fragile, or cross a line he could never uncross. Ellie coughed again, harder this time, raw and rasping. Carter's brow tightened. He didn't need a stethoscope to recognize that kind of cough. It wasn't just the cold. Jace looked up, hesitant. "Would you come in?" Carter gave a small nod, but his eyes never left the little girl. "I need to check your sister. That cough isn't normal. If she stays here much longer, it could get worse. Fast." Jace lowered his head. His hand gently squeezed Ellie's, as if apologizing for not being able to protect her better. Only then did Carter step across the threshold, slowly but with a resolve that said a decision had been made, one that couldn't be undone. "Are you a doctor?" the little girl asked softly. "No. I was a soldier once, so I know a bit about medicine." "Then, are you a good person?" Ellie continued. Carter's hand paused midair. A simple question, sharp as a blade. "I don't know," he answered slowly. "I used to think I was. Then there came a time. I wasn't so sure anymore." "But you didn't leave my brother behind. Why not? Everyone else did." Carter looked directly into Ellie's eyes and replied, his voice steady. "Because your brother didn't deserve to be left behind, and because I once left someone behind, someone I still see in my dreams, every single night." Ellie didn't say anything more. She turned to Jace and gave a small smile. "I knew it. I knew there'd be someone who wouldn't leave you." On the worn wooden table, Carter noticed a piece of paper folded into quarters, tucked beneath a cracked ceramic cup. He picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If I'm gone, please don't leave the children. If even one person stops, I pray they see, I pray they hear My child. Carter folded the note again and slipped it into his chest pocket. He said nothing. But something inside him, hardened long ago by war, by fire, by loss, cracked just the tiniest bit. Jace sat down, adjusted the blanket around his sister, and spoke softly. My dad. He didn't start that fire. I know everyone thinks he did, but they're wrong. Carter gave a small nod. I'm starting to think so too. Jace looked up at him, his eyes holding the kind of hope that had been waiting a long, long time, waiting for an adult to take his words seriously. That night, Carter began, sitting down by the fire. His voice was slow, like he was unraveling something knotted tight in his mind. I was on the emergency team, got the call over the radio near midnight. Someone shouted, clear as day, Holloway's inside, he's carrying a kid, still alive. Carter swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. By the time I got there, the warehouse exploded. There was nothing left, just the sound of people pointing fingers. Jace lifted his head. His eyes were red, but not from smoke. He trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of hearing. For the first time in years, someone spoke of his father, without suspicion. They said he set the fire to cover something up, Carter went on, his gaze still locked on the fire. But what I saw, it didn't add up. Something was off, really off. Jace looked down, then suddenly raised a hand to cover his face. His shoulders trembled. A choked sound escaped him, like grief pressed so deep it had to claw its way up. I tried to tell them, he whispered, that my dad wasn't like that, but they all shook their heads. They looked at me like I had fire running in my veins. Carter turned back, looking at the boy, with eyes that understood. No one ever listened, huh? Jace nodded slowly, tears falling onto the worn fabric of his shirt. Never. Not until now. A heavy silence settled over the wooden room. Carter reached over, poured a glass of water, and gently placed it in the boy's hands. Well then, starting today, you won't have to speak alone anymore. The quiet stretched between the three of them, between the cold stillness and the scent of rotting wood in the cabin. Carter looked over at Ellie, her eyes dull, her skin pale, her breathing ragged like it was coming apart in pieces. He walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. Laying a hand on her forehead, he frowned softly. She's burning up. She always does. Whenever the wind changes, Jace mumbled. The doctor in town doesn't treat anyone from the Holloway family. I tried to get medicine once, they said they don't sell to us. Carter stood up and pulled his phone from his coat pocket. Then I'll take your sister to the hospital in the next county. No begging, no waiting. Just what needs to be done. Jace gripped his sister's hand and shook his head. If you do that, the whole town will hate you. Carter looked down at the boy. I'm not here to be liked. Then he turned to Ellie again. Her eyes blinked faintly, too weak to ask questions. Carter gently rested his hand over the thin blanket and spoke like a promise. We're not leaving anyone behind. Not ever again. Night had settled over the hill of retired soldiers. The wind hissed through the gaps in the wooden door. Pine branches scraped against each other, making sparse, hollow sounds, like distant knocking from a place far away. Carter sat alone in the second-floor room of the veterans' boarding house. The room contained nothing more than a writing desk, a foldable bed, an old bookshelf, and a file he had kept locked away since 2019 in a rusted metal drawer. Earlier that afternoon, he had taken Ellie to the county hospital, 30 miles out of town. The doctor said she would need long-term treatment. There was still a chance she could recover if intervention came in time and with proper care. Carter didn't hesitate. He signed every document without a second thought. He also called an old friend who managed a winter training camp, asking him to take care of Jace for a few days, to give the boy a warm bed, hot meals, and a place where no one looked at him like he was a monster. Now, the room was filled only with the ticking of a clock and the weight of one man, torn between past and present. Carter opened the drawer, his hand pausing for a few seconds above the lock. Then, he turned the dial. Click, the drawer slid open, releasing a scent of old paper and ash, as if time itself shuddered at being disturbed. He spread the file across the desk. Crime scene photos, warehouse diagrams, recorded radio chatter all sealed away years ago under the conclusion, accidental fire due to negligence. But now, Jace's voice kept echoing in his head. My father didn't do it, but no one believed me. Carter reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled slip of paper, the note he had picked up from the tiny altar in the wooden house, a woman's handwriting, shaky and slanted. If I'm gone, please don't abandon the children. They are innocent. Believe them, even if the whole world doesn't. Carter's eyes lingered on that line for a long time. They are innocent, he repeated, the words dry and brittle, like a vow. The fire from that year, he remembered it vividly. By the time he arrived, the building was already consumed by flames. People pointed to Holloway's body without hesitation, blaming him as if by instinct. But where had the fire really started? Why were there screams from the office? And why had he never asked those questions again? Carter clenched his fists, staring hard at a smoke-stained photo of a man running through the flames with a child in his arms. If he'd been wrong, then that boy hadn't just been dragging a sack of firewood all these years. He'd been dragging the weight of a wrongful verdict. Carter opened the file again, page after page, yellowed at the edges, covered in his own tight handwriting, notes from the investigation into the warehouse fire at the Glenmore Council Center. A case closed in just 3 weeks with a conclusion stamped in ink. Electrical short in the archive storage. Accidental. But he remembered clearly, that night hadn't gone like they said. He remembered the alarm blaring during his shift, the acrid, suffocating stench of burning plastic. He remembered the soldier, Holloway, bursting in like a man possessed, screaming for his daughter amid the flames. Carter had once thought he understood that case, had once accepted the official report. But now, after seeing Jace, hearing Ellie's voice, reading the letter from a mother long gone, and looking into the boy's eyes as he said, "This whole town wants me gone," something inside him stirred. He flipped to the page with the scene photo, a black and white aerial shot, grainy but still clear enough. Flames had started on the east side, where the council's records office stood, not the west side's flammable materials shed, as the report claimed. Why the discrepancy? Why hadn't anyone brought it up? And why had all the blame fallen on Holloway, the man who ran into the fire, not away from it? Carter sat up straight, reached for his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Garrett, a former firefighter, Carter's old teammate, abruptly reassigned after the blaze. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. A gravelly voice came through the line, half guarded, half like it had been expecting this moment. "You? Thought you'd never call." Carter rested his elbow on the desk, fingers absently turning an old, rusted lighter. "Need to meet. It's about Glenmore. Tomorrow." On the other end, a soft sigh drifted into the receiver, a short silence, just long enough for Carter to know the man was remembering something bitter. "I knew you'd circle back to this, since the day they forced me out, since the way you looked at the scene, but didn't say a word." Garrett cleared his throat, then spoke slowly, evenly. "All right, the old repair station. Back road through the woods, 1 o'clock sharp. But you better brace yourself. Some things can't be said gently." Carter didn't reply. He just stared at the blurred photo on his desk, his eyes cutting through the layers of ash and memory. The wind swept across the old roof again. Carter stood motionless in the room, his eyes fixed on the file in front of him. He was facing a truth heavier than fire, the truth that he might have bowed his head to a lie. And if that was true, then he had helped bury a family in darkness they'd never rise from. The following afternoon, Carter drove down the muddy red dirt road at the southern edge of town, where the charred brick foundation of the old warehouse still stood alone in a field of yellowing grass. Nearby, a tin shack with a sagging grey roof sat sunken between 2 low mounds. An old wooden sign, hanging crooked by the door, read, "Garrett's Weld and Fix closed down." He brought the car to a stop. The air was still. Wind moaned through rusted tin sheets, making a low, aching creak. The shop door was slightly ajar. Carter pushed it open without knocking and stepped inside. Garrett was hunched over, welding a broken steel frame. His shirt was frayed at the shoulders, hair the color of ash, and his back bowed as if carrying 5 years' worth of silence. Hearing footsteps, he paused, removed his safety goggles, but didn't look up. "You came after all." His voice was dry and hoarse, not surprised, but expectant. Carter stood still for a moment before speaking. "Too many things don't add up. The report doesn't match the kid's story and the memories from that night." Garrett set his tools down, turned around, locking eyes with him. "You had doubts back then, didn't you?" Carter didn't deny it. "I did, but when you suddenly resigned after the incident, I thought you chose silence." Garrett let out a hollow chuckle, bitter beneath the sound. "I didn't choose it. I was going to turn in the original records, but early the next morning, the captain and someone from the town council came into my office, left a termination letter on my desk and said, off the record, 'You want peace? Rip it up.' And I did." Carter stepped closer to the desk, his eyes flicking toward a steel cabinet used for storing files. "And now? Why are you telling me this?" Garrett was silent for a few seconds, then slowly, almost like a confession, "Because I heard the boy's name, Jace Holloway, because I saw him dragging that sack of firewood across the square, as if he was dragging my guilt with him. I can't die with this buried inside me." He opened the cabinet, took out an old folder tied with a faded cloth string, and placed it on the desk. The original blueprint, and a photo from the scene I never turned in. The fire started in the admin office, not where they said it did. Carter unfolded the drawing. His eyes landed on a red circle marked on the east side of the warehouse. "A place only council staff had access to," he muttered. Garrett nodded. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "That night I heard glass shatter. Someone screamed from that room. But after I was forced out of the force, I convinced myself, maybe it's better to let it all fade away. But then, that boy grew up in silence with his father's name dragged through the mud." He pulled another photo from the file, a black and white shot, the corner burned, taken in the administrative hallway. "I stayed quiet, and he paid the price for me, a 12-year-old kid." Carter took the photo, his grip tightening around it. "And now if I stay silent, then I'm no different from you." He stared at the picture, unmoving. This was the first real proof. Not just blueprints, but a living witness, someone who heard the scream, saw where the fire began, knew it had all been buried, and kept his mouth shut for 5 long years. "Does anyone else know about this?" Carter asked. "No. The others took early retirement. A few just vanished from the record. This town," Carter whispered, "it buried both the fire and the truth." Garrett sank into his chair, letting out a tired breath. "I used to think staying silent would keep the kids safe, but peace doesn't come from hiding things, it comes from facing them." Carter folded the blueprint and tucked it into his inner pocket. He didn't need anything else. The wall had cracked, and what lay behind it was ready to come to light. He turned toward the door. "No, thank you." Just a quiet nod. Garrett didn't get up, didn't look back. He returned to his welding bench, slid his goggles on, and let the torch flare back to life. Not to hide something this time, but to mend what had been broken. Night fell over the town square of Glenmore. The town hall stood silent, as if it had long forgotten its purpose. Inside, a dim yellow light flickered in the security room, casting shadows across the dusty window panes. A place that was once the nerve center of an entire community, now cold and hollow, like an archive of unfinished memories. Carter moved quietly along the north wall, coat zipped up, hood pulled low over his brow. His eyes locked on the steel side door, where faded silver lettering peeled away from the surface. Archives. Authorized personnel only. He gripped his phone lightly. On the screen, just a short message from Max. "Okay, 15 minutes. Max, an old friend who used to work in the town hall's tech department, now in charge of HVAC maintenance and internal infrastructure, was the only person Carter could still trust. And the only person who ever knew that the 2019 records hadn't been destroyed entirely. They'd been sealed off and stored in the sub-basement. It was Garrett who'd said it 2 days ago, pointing to a crime scene map and whispering, "If you really want to know who burned down the storage building, you'll have to go to the ground floor of Town Hall. There's a budget ledger that was marked for disposal, but I'd bet Max knows where it ended up." A faint click echoed, metal grinding softly, like teeth clenching. The secondary electronic lock had just been released remotely. Without hesitation, Carter pushed the door open. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, its concrete walls stained and uneven. A motion sensor bulb flickered on, then went dark again. He followed the layout Max had sent, left past the old supply closet, then down a creaky wooden stairwell leading to the basement. No cameras on this level, an old policy from back when Mayor Luther Grant had ordered budget cuts, no surveillance needed in the archive basement. And now, that very policy was the first crack in the wall of lies Carter was about to tear down. The hallway stretched on endlessly. Each of Carter's footsteps echoed against the stone floor, like a soft tap on the heart of this aging city. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Every drawer was marked by year, 1998 to 2024, but Carter wasn't searching by year. He was following a scent, the smell of old paper, of dust, of the dry cold that clings to things that once burned hot, but had since been buried deep. He stopped at a drawer sealed shut, slid in the key Max had given him. Careful, it might have been sealed but not deleted from the system, Max had warned. The drawer opened with a soft creak. Not much inside, just a single silver document box, sealed with red tape stamped, "Archived, do not process." Carter carried it over to the table and cut it open with a small blade. Inside, the papers were in disarray. Budget expense reports for the Central Park project, relief fund allocations after the fire, a stack of photocopied invoices for fire control equipment, all bearing the signature of Luther Grant, the mayor at the time of the fire and the head of the town council. At the bottom of the box, he found a slim, dark leather-bound notebook, tied shut with a soft strap. No seal, no encryption. Carter opened it. The handwriting was slanted but neat, detailing internal meetings, notes about fund transfers, compensation payouts quietly advanced into private accounts, and one line, underlined thick in red, Sep 25, ledger stored in admin office, must be destroyed before month's end. Personally instruct security to ignite warehouse stage using local flammables. Carter didn't blink. He flipped through the remaining pages. There was a rough sketch of the warehouse, a fire origin point marked with a note, "Highest ignition risk zone, paper and stored ethanol, leaves no electrical trace." A faint sound echoed from the hallway. Carter slipped the papers into his inner jacket pocket, folded the notebook, closed the box, and moved toward the side exit. But just as he reached the threshold, a figure blocked his path. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a thick coat, hand already resting near his belt. Under the hallway light, the silver badge on his chest gleamed unmistakably. Sheriff Doyle. "What are you doing here, Carter?" His voice was low and dry. He didn't need to raise it. The air in the room dropped a few degrees all the same. Carter stopped. His eyes stayed fixed on the sheriff's hand, hovering close to the gun. "Just looking for a few things that have been forgotten far too long." "You have no right to be here." Doyle took another step forward, his shadow stretching long across the tiled floor. "I could have you arrested for trespassing and possession of classified materials." Carter didn't flinch. He pulled a small notebook from the inside of his coat and held it up. "Go ahead. But if I don't walk out of here, everything in this notebook will land on the editor's desk at the Mountain Echo by sunrise. And trust me, they'll be very interested in the signature of a veteran firefighter who was pressured into altering an official investigation report." Doyle froze. His eyes flicked to the notebook, close enough to recognize Garrett's handwriting, close enough to realize Carter wasn't bluffing. "You know you're playing with fire, don't you?" he said quietly. The threat was gone. What remained was weight, measured, heavy. Carter's voice was calm, steady. "No, I'm digging through the ashes, and if there's fire underneath, it wasn't me who lit it." A long silence followed. Doyle didn't speak. He exhaled slowly, his gaze retreating, as if weighing something far heavier than authority, perhaps conscience. At last, he stepped aside. "I didn't see you tonight, but remember this: what you're unearthing could bury an entire town, and wherever you go, it'll follow." Carter gave a slight nod and walked past without looking back. He pushed open the side door. A blast of cold air swept in, like a final warning. Outside, the square was still and empty. The first light of dawn crept over the roof of the old town hall, casting its glow on the dew-covered statue of the unknown soldier, as if the town, long asleep under a blanket of lies, had begun to stir. Carter stood there, gripping the notebook so tightly his knuckles turned white. In the cold, what burned inside him wasn't rage. It was responsibility. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what needed to be done, and this time, no one would be left behind in the dark. 3 days after the break-in, Carter had gathered everything: a site diagram provided by Garrett, a never-before-released photo of the scorched hallway, an audio recording of the confession, a copy of the administrative files before they were destroyed, and an excerpt from Holloway's journal, found inside a wooden box near the fireplace where he had once written, "If I have to die, I want my child to know I didn't run." Carter reached out to 3 news outlets: the Mountain Echo, Glenmore Gazette, and a former reporter he had worked with, back during his days at the Pentagon. The responses were all vague and hesitant. "Too risky. The town will riot. We can't publish anything without approval from the sheriff's office." One editor, though sympathetic, was brutally honest. "Carter, this story touches City Hall, the police department, and the state insurance fund. They'll bury it. Trust me." Carter was silent for a long time after that call, but that evening in his motel room, when he saw little Ellie taking shaky steps with her new metal braces, and Jace standing beside her, looking up instead of down for the first time, he knew staying silent would be a crime in itself. So he walked straight to the town office and signed up for a community address slot on Sunday morning. He rented equipment, built a podium, and hand-delivered letters to every household. The message was just one line: "Come to the town square at 11 a.m. There's something you need to know, and no one else dares to say it." Down front, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. A man hunched his shoulders. An elderly woman raised a handkerchief to her lips. But no one left. No one had the courage to walk away. Carter took a deep breath, lifted the worn leather notebook in his hands, and began speaking, not like a man giving a speech, but as someone telling the truth. "I want to tell you a story about a firefighter. His name was Daniel Holloway. He was the first responder at the Archives fire 5 years ago. That night, I was there too, part of the military emergency unit. When I arrived, the radio was still crackling. Holloway's gone in for the kid. And I saw it. Through the flames and smoke, a man carrying a child in his arms, running straight through fire that was devouring everything. He screamed a name, then vanished in the explosion." Carter paused. From his bag, he pulled out a singed photograph, an enlarged still from an old fire camera. In the picture, a man could be seen rushing out of the blaze with a little girl in his arms. It was blurry, but unmistakable, a life or death moment. He held it high for everyone to see. He wasn't the arsonist. He was the only one who didn't run. Lowering the photo, Carter unfolded a building map, the very same diagram Garrett had given him. According to the report back then, the fire started on the west wing. But the 1995 blueprints and photos from the scene show the first ignition point was the administrative office, the place where financial records and illegal disbursement slips were kept. "And this," Carter said, pressing a button, "is an audio recording, the voice of Garrett Ford, the welder who was on site that day." A gravelly voice played through the speakers, heavy like stone pressing down on the room. I heard screaming from the council office, but they told me not to put it in the report. I erased it, and that boy took the fall for the whole damn town. Carter then lifted a worn notebook. This belonged to Mayor Luther Grant. I'm going to read the last line on page 27 so no one can deny it anymore. He opened the notebook and read, each word clear as a bell. I ordered the warehouse burned to destroy the paperwork. Holloway happened to be there. We let him take the blame. Everyone believed it, because he's dead. The square fell into a deafening silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Every icy layer of pretense began to crack. Then, a sound. Mrs. Mullins dropped to her knees. The man beside her lunged to catch her, but she had already fainted. Faces that had once turned their backs on Jace now lowered in shame, wordless. No more mocking, no more denial. No one dared to look toward the front row, where two thin children stood, silent witnesses to a truth buried for far too long. Jace remained still. He said nothing. He didn't blink. Ellie gripped her brother's hand, trembling slightly, then took a step forward. Carter looked at her, nodded gently, and bent down to offer her the microphone. She touched the mic. Her small hands shook, but her voice rang out, clearer than any church bell that had ever echoed through that square. My dad wasn't a bad man. My brother's not invisible, and I'm not afraid anymore. And for the first time in 5 years, someone clapped. One person, then two, then the entire square rose to their feet, clapping thunderously, not for Carter, not for the new mayor, but for a father who could no longer defend himself, and for two children who had never been heard. The first applause came from someone who had once stayed silent, Jace's former teacher, the one who had turned away when he was beaten right there in the classroom. She stood up and clapped quietly. Then came the sound of chairs sliding. An elderly man with a cane rose to his feet, followed by a young mother holding her child. Then the entire row behind them followed. The applause spread like ripples. No cheering, no pressure, just a sign that an old layer of ice had finally begun to melt. Jace stood still. He turned to Carter, lips trembling, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms tightly around the man. Not out of obligation, but because, for the first time in his life, someone had chosen to stand with him. "Thank you, sir," Jace's voice broke. "No one ever believed me, but you did. And now, the whole town has to know the truth." Carter didn't speak. He simply patted the boy's back, his other hand resting gently on Ellie's shoulder, as if he too was being healed. A grey-haired woman stepped out from the third row. It was Mrs. Mullins, just regaining her strength after fainting. Her aged face creased with regret, and she dropped to her knees, unable to look the two children in the eye. "Forgive us," she whispered. "The blame doesn't lie with just one of us. It's all of us. We let you live in the dark." Garrett stood at the corner of the square, leaning on his cane, dust on his brown coat, his eyes red-rimmed. He gave Carter a faint nod, a silent thank you, but a profound one. Sheriff Doyle never showed up, but Carter knew come morning there would be no more hiding in the shadows. That afternoon, the Glenmore Post released a special edition. On the front page was a photo of Jace and Ellie standing in the middle of the town square, with Carter behind them, holding the notebook of sins, but with a gaze no longer haunted by the past. In the upper left corner, the headline read, "Buried Truth, Mayor Luther Grant indicted for evidence tampering, framing firefighter Holloway." The entire town read it. And for the first time, people didn't just nod and move on. They looked at each other, not out of shame, but because something new had begun. On the wooden bench in front of the town hall, Carter sat down beside the two children. He opened the notebook, flipped to the last page, and pulled out a small piece of paper, a crude drawing by Ellie, a tiny house with a chimney, and next to it, 3 people holding hands. "This is my future," Ellie said with a soft smile. "I'm going to draw it again, with a bluer sky this time." After more than 3 months of treatment at the regional hospital, Ellie, the little girl who once lay silent beneath a thin blanket, her legs motionless, was finally able to stand, thanks to a neurological rehabilitation program and physical therapy support. Her body still couldn't walk normally, but with her new walker and a resilient spirit, Ellie was like a sapling after a storm, fragile but unbroken. The truth about the fire years ago was finally brought to light, and the name of Jace's father, firefighter Holloway, was cleared. A falsified report, a voice recording from Garrett, and Mayor Luther Grant's personal notebook forced the entire Glenmore system to bow its head. Luther, once seen as a symbol of stability, was indicted for fabricating evidence and indirectly causing the deaths of 3 people in the 2019 fire. In the days that followed, Carter, with help from the Veterans Fund, purchased the land where Jace and Ellie's old cabin once stood. He announced plans to build a free community center for mountain children on that spot, naming it the Holloway Memorial Home. At dawn, sunlight filtered through the pines and cast warm rays onto the white and blue trimmed grounds. A brass plaque on the wooden gate read, "Holloway Memorial Home, Community Support Center for Mountain Children." The sound of a cane echoed rhythmically as Garrett, the aging welder, made his way to the front row. Beside him stood Carter, no longer in uniform but wearing a simple white shirt with sleeves loosely rolled, symbolizing a man who had laid down his weapon and opened his heart to the world. Ellie, now able to stand with her walker, sat beside Mrs. Mullins. The older woman bowed her head and said softly, "I should have spoken up sooner, but today I'm here to listen if you'll still let me." Lucille, the bakery owner who once turned Jace away, approached with a tray of warm, fragrant pastries. She set it down on the communal table and whispered, "You used to come here selling firewood. Now, if you'll allow, I'd like to come here to bake." One by one, people walked up the steps, each placing a smooth white stone, following a new tradition Garrett had suggested. Let every wrong be righted by a deed, not by flowers or words. Jace, dressed in a clean shirt and brand new shoes, stepped up to the podium. In his hand was the first speech he had ever written, but after glancing around the room, he folded the paper shut. His voice rose, slow but steady. "I used to think I'd be hauling sacks of firewood for the rest of my life. But today I understand something. If someone walks beside you, then you're not hauling anything alone. Here, we carry each other." The first applause came from Jace's former teacher, the one who had once stayed silent. Then, one by one, people stood up, not because anyone asked them to, but because something inside their hearts had softened. Ellie smiled, a real smile, for the first time. She straightened her back, gripped her walker firmly, and her eyes lit up. In the back row, Sheriff Doyle had arrived late. Quietly, he handed Jace an envelope. It was the deed to a piece of land out west. "For a playground," he said, "if you still want to build it." Out behind the lavender bushes, Carter knelt down and dug a small hole. He placed inside it a wooden box containing his old badge and a faded red and silver ribbon, the symbols that had once defined his life in uniform. "What I used to carry to protect others," Carter said softly, "I'm burying now, so I can finally live." At the end of the ceremony, Jace turned to Carter and hugged him, for the first time. Then, his voice low, he whispered into the man's shoulder, "If it weren't for you, my sister and I would still be sleeping in the cold. I don't even know how to thank you." Carter gently patted the boy's back. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just live in a way that honors the name Holloway." The late spring forest still held the damp scent of lingering chill, but the sky was no longer a dull gray. On a small clearing nestled between the pines, 12 children from the villages surrounding Glenmore sat huddled together. Each one carried a cloth bag filled with books and food. No one had to drag a sack. No one kept their head down. Jace was now a guide at the center. He didn't speak with fancy words, but the kids listened, because when he said, "I used to eat snow to get by," They didn't laugh. They believed him. He sat in the middle of the circle, the campfire casting a flicker across his sun-darkened cheeks, telling stories of the clay hill, the broken wheel, and the man in uniform who once lifted him up when the entire town turned its back. Far off, Ellie was walking along the forest's edge. No one was holding her, no metal frame. Just her legs, once paralyzed, now moving slowly, one step at a time. Wobbly, but chosen. Every step she took was like a slap in the face of the indifference that once trampled over both siblings. But not anymore. Every step said, "I'm alive, and I won't bow my head again." Carter sat on a wooden chair in the backyard, holding a letter stamped with the seal of his old unit. They were inviting him back, with a higher rank, triple the pay, the promise of serving the nation the way he once had. He read it through without a flicker of emotion. But when Jace and Ellie approached, he burned the letter right there in front of them. The paper curled, twisted, and turned to ash. "I used to be a soldier," Carter said, his voice rough like old timber. "But when your father was framed, I stayed silent. I knew the truth, and I turned away. I was a coward, and I regret it. If I had spoken up that day, maybe your father wouldn't have died. Maybe you too wouldn't have had to survive by dragging sacks of firewood." He knelt, resting a hand on Jace's shoulder, eyes steady, unflinching. "I can't give you back the years you lost. But if you'll let me, starting today, I'll be the one who stays. I'll make breakfast, walk you to school, teach you how to fix locks, grow vegetables, tell war stories. I'll do whatever it takes, so long as I never turn my back again." Jace stayed quiet for a long time, then slowly opened the back door of the cabin. He spoke softly, without looking at him. "There are 2 bowls left in the house. That's just enough." Since that day, Carter never left again. He woke up early, made coffee, planted vegetables behind the house, and sealed the old library door that Garrett used to use. Every morning he poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, and one he placed in front of a framed photo of his late wife and daughter. When people asked why he never remarried, he simply smiled and said, "I live with what I choose to keep." Garrett's old room had been turned into a small library. On the shelves, beside career guides and military maps, sat a leather-bound notebook, open to its final page. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "I stayed silent for too long, but at the end of life, I saw light in the place I once turned away from. If there's a next life, let me be a child in Glenmore." Garrett passed away in his sleep, leaving behind the key to his private home and a handwritten note donating all his possessions to the center. There was no grand funeral. He had once said, "If someone truly forgives, they'll come visit me when the cameras are gone." A week later, Jace stood by the fireplace at the center. In his hands was the old burlap sack, the thing that had once been his armor, his back, his shoulder, his entire shelter. It had been washed, stitched up. No longer torn, but still the same sack. "This used to be my walls, my roof, my spine. But now, it's enough," Jace said softly, then gently let it fall into the flames. Not one child asked why. They just held hands. Ellie placed a hand on his shoulder, whispered, "You don't have to carry it anymore. It's someone else's turn now." That night, a campfire blazed in the heart of Glenmore Square. No orders were given, no loudspeakers, just homes quietly opening their windows. People stepping out in silence. One by one, they placed small white stones at Jace's feet, following the old custom Garrett had once taught. 1 person, then 2, then 30. As if the whole town was bowing in apology, without saying a word. A week later, Jace wrote the first letter of his life. It was addressed to a boy in a nearby town. Rumors said the child was being bullied because his father was an alcoholic. "My name is Jace Holloway. I'm not good at giving advice, but I used to think no one would save me. Then someone stopped. So I'm writing this, Not to fix anything, but to sit beside you. If you need someone to walk a stretch with you, I will. But from that day on, people called it the town of those once left behind, and those who chose to stop. The story you just heard isn't just about correcting a false report or clearing the name of a father long gone. It's about something deeper, the restoration of trust, the quiet return of dignity to children once cast aside, and above all, a reminder that truth can be buried, but it cannot be killed. Silence may last a while, but never forever. Have you ever witnessed an injustice but felt too small to speak up? Are you holding something inside, afraid no one would truly listen? This story is for anyone who's ever felt invisible. And if that's where you are right now, remember, someone out there is searching for the truth. All you need to do is hold on. I know that for many of you, these videos aren't just entertainment. They're a way to reconnect with something you've lost along the way. So, if you're feeling tired, if the world feels like it's forgotten you, leave me a comment. I will read it, and I will listen. And if you know someone, a friend, a loved one, who has ever been wronged or unheard, please share this video with them, because sometimes all it takes is one story at the right time to soften a whole life's worth of pain.